This video is brought to you by Nebula. Over the last 2 weeks or so, NORAD, the organisation responsible for American and Canadian aerospace defence, has been conspicuously busy. On February the 4th, NORAD sent out an F-22 to shoot down a Chinese surveillance balloon, which it had been tracking for the past few days. This was pretty big news in and of itself, but in the last week, NORAD has shot down another 3 objects, and it looks like we're either seeing the beginning of an alien invasion or a new Cold War. So in this video, we're going to try and figure out what's going on. Is China really flying a range of spy balloons over mainland America? Are they really meteorological balloons, or is it perhaps the aliens that are finally paying us a visit? So this story really starts in early February, when locals started noticing a weird white dot floating in the sky over Montana. After a fair bit of public interest, on Thursday the 2nd of February, the US Department of Defense basically confirmed that it was a high-altitude surveillance balloon. According to White House spokesperson John Kirby, it was about the size of 2 or 3 buses, and it was flying at about 60,000 feet. In a separate, more recent statement, the head of NORAD described it as about 200 feet tall and weighing thousands of pounds. In a follow-up briefing, the Pentagon's press secretary told journalists that the US was very confident that the balloon belonged to the People's Republic of China, which was consistent with the meteorological data. This is probably both because, well, who else would want to send a balloon over the continental US, and because meteorologists can trace the balloon's path by monitoring wind paths, and it looks like the balloon flew from central China over Japan, Alaska, Canada, and finally Montana. Interestingly, the DoD has said that, while the balloon was passing over a few, quote, sensitive sites, including presumably the nuclear missile silo field at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, they didn't think the balloon could provide the PRC with any more information than what they could collect via low Earth orbit satellites. Having originally refrained from taking kinetic action against the balloon to avoid any fallout from the debris, on Saturday the 4th, NORAD sent out an F-22 and shot it down about 6 nautical miles off Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. Then, less than a week later, NORAD sent another F-22 to shoot down another object, this time floating over Alaska. This object was far smaller than the original spy balloon, about the size of a small car, and was flying at about 40,000 feet. While we don't have confirmation yet, a Defense Department official told reporters on Saturday that the object shattered when it landed, which suggests it's not a balloon. Then, a day later, on February the 11th, NORAD sent yet another F-22 to shoot down another similar object over Yukon in northern Canada. According to US and Canadian officials, the object was cylindrical in shape, and, like the object shot down in Alaska, it was flying at about 40,000 feet, and significantly smaller than the original spy balloon. Then, finally, on Sunday, NORAD sent out an F-16 to shoot down yet another object flying over Lake Huron on the US-Canadian border. This object was apparently octagonal with strings hanging off it, and it was flying even lower at 20,000 feet. All 3 objects shot down in the last few days were unmanned and travelling at speeds lower than 40 miles per hour. On Sunday, the head of NORAD, General Glenn Van Herk, said that the US didn't yet know how the final 3 objects stayed aloft, and refused to call them balloons. So what's going on? Well, let's start off by ruling out aliens. There's been a lot of speculation that this could be some sort of extraterrestrial interference, especially after Van Herk said that he, quote, hadn't ruled anything out when asked if it might be aliens, but this seems very unlikely. For starters, these things were slow-moving, easy targets, and other defense officials have since said there's 0 chance this is aliens. If it's not aliens, and the Pentagon's assessment that the first balloon was indeed a Chinese surveillance device is correct, then the most likely explanation seems to be that these are also Chinese surveillance devices of some sort. Now, originally the CCP denied this, and instead claimed that the balloon was actually a weather balloon that had drifted off course and warned the US that the debris belonged to China, not the US. The US disagreed, with State Department officials telling reporters that the balloon was, quote, clearly for intelligence surveillance, before the Chinese Foreign Ministry claimed that the US had started it by illegally sending at least 10 spy balloons into Chinese territory last year, which the US denied. Chinese state media also reported on Sunday that the country was preparing to shoot down its own unidentified flying object over the coast of the Shandong province in China's northeast, although it's unclear if anything's happened since. Now, to be clear, we're not saying anything definitive here. At the time of writing, no one knows where the devices came from, and it might well turn out that the CCP have nothing to do with them, but the reaction by the Chinese Foreign Ministry suggests that it's theirs, and it's hard to see another country with the capacity and confidence to pull this sort of stunt. So, if it is the CCP, then this raises two questions. First, why are they sending them at all if, as the US claims, they don't have any advantage over satellites? And second, why so many now? Let's start with the first question. As we see it, there are basically two reasons the Chinese might be sending these balloons. First, it might be that these balloons have better surveillance capacity than the US thinks they do. Or second, if these balloons are indeed less effective than bog-standard low-Earth satellites, then the CCP are probably using them to embarrass the US. And, well, to be fair to the CCP, there is something quite embarrassing about a massive, super obvious balloon floating above Montana, which is one of the reasons why American politicians reacted so furiously to something that might not actually do very much. On to the second question, why so many now? According to the Pentagon, this isn't the first spy balloon to fly over the US, but we've now had 4 incidents in just over a week, and this is confusing because, well, in the last few months, it looked like China was angling for a partial détente with the US. Having spent most of the pandemic furiously criticising the US and indulging in so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, China's diplomacy has been significantly more cordial recently. Xi's New Year's Eve address was unusually measured, emphasising the value of peace and neighbourly relations. And in a Washington Post op-ed on January the 4th, China's outgoing ambassador in Washington and new foreign minister expressed his appreciation for America's friendly and hard-working people. Xi and Biden even held a little summit on the sidelines of COP27 in November, where they agreed to resume talks on climate change. And Antony Blinken's now postponed visit to Xi in Beijing would have made him the first Secretary of State to visit China since Mike Pompeo in 2018. This is why the timing of this provocation, if indeed it is China's doing, is so confusing. It comes after months of relatively friendly gestures, and it's caused a massive rift. It's possibly something to do with the recent Enhanced Defence Cooperation Agreement between the US and the Philippines, clearly targeted at China and Taiwan, that will allow the US access to 4 unspecified Philippines military bases, and therefore an increased presence in the South China Sea and the Asia-Pacific more generally. When the deal was announced in late January, the Chinese Foreign Ministry accused the US of jeopardizing regional peace and stability, and indulging in a zero-sum mentality. So it's possible that the balloon is a retaliation for that. Perhaps the more likely explanation is a more mundane one, that this is all because NORAD have loosened their filters. Essentially, before the balloon incident, NORAD only responded to things that looked like missiles and planes. But according to a report in the Washington Post, after the balloon incident, they loosened their filters to detect basically anything balloon-like. It could be that these sorts of things were always floating over the US, but NORAD has only just started paying attention. Either way, this has been bad news for US-China relations, and the bellicose reaction from both sides should worry anyone interested in avoiding a great power conflict. This is far from the only mysterious and unusual thing going on though. And our friend Neo has a whole series, Under Exposure, which tackles topics from what really happened at the Bin Laden raid, the truth behind the MH17 investigation, or how the Twin Towers were built. That's a series exclusive to Nebula, the streaming service we're building with a whole bunch of our creator friends, many of whom you're likely to already know and love. If you sign up to Nebula, you'll find all of our videos ad-free and occasionally released before YouTube. On top of that, you'll also find a whole bunch of TLDR explainers exclusively available on Nebula, plus an extended version of our show, The Daily Briefing, every single weekday. There's way more than just TLDR though. There's other original series we know you'll love, like Real Life Law's incredible Modern Conflicts, which breaks down contemporary disputes from all over the world. Extremities from Wendover Productions, which uncovers some of the world's most remote places. And of course, Neo's Underexposure. All of these are only available on Nebula, just like our extended daily briefing and a whole bunch of other exclusive TLDR content which will never make it to YouTube. If you want to sign up, then use the link in the description so that they know you came through us. That helps us out a whole lot, as does watching on Nebula more generally. So thanks for signing up, and we'll see you on Nebula.